The letter trembled in Sarah Whitmore's hands. The words blurred through her tears, a cruel joke that wasn't a joke at all. Hidden in the back of her father's heavy oak desk, tucked beneath ledgers and land deeds, she had found it. A copy of the letter her own family had sent to a stranger, a rancher named Jacob Steele. "We are sending you our ugliest daughter as your mail-order bride." The script was her mother's, elegant and precise, each loop and curve a perfectly formed little knife. "Consider it our family's way of getting rid of damaged goods. She is scarred, plain as dirt, and already 24 years old. If you are fool enough to want her, she is yours to keep." Her heart didn't just break. It shattered, exploded into a million tiny, sharp pieces that lodged themselves in her throat, her chest, her stomach. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an execution of the spirit. Her own family had written her off, sold her like unwanted livestock to a man halfway across the country. They hadn't even told her. They had simply packed her bags and told her a suitable arrangement had been made. But what Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine as she crumpled the letter in her fist, was that 3 weeks ago, Jacob Steele had stood in front of his own fireplace in the Arizona Territory. He had read that very same letter, his jaw tightening with every hateful word. He hadn't hesitated. He had tossed the venomous paper directly into the flames. And as he watched the words ugliest daughter and damaged goods turn to black ash and float up the chimney, he had made a promise. Not to her family, but to himself, and to her. Any woman whose family could be so cruel, so blind, deserved a chance. A real chance. He would give her that chance, even if she never knew the truth. Now, as the dusty stagecoach rattled to a stop in the middle of Copper Ridge, Sarah felt the dry Arizona air suck the breath from her lungs. She stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt, pulling her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, a shield against the eyes she was sure were already staring. Judging. Jacob watched her from across the street, and his own breath caught in his throat. The woman walking toward him was nothing like the letter. Not even close. It was like they had described the moon and sent him the sun. She was beautiful. Not in a delicate porcelain doll way, but in a way that was real, and raw, and made his chest ache. Her auburn hair was afire in the afternoon light, and her green eyes, even from this distance, held a strength that spoke of 1,000 silent battles won. And yes, there was a scar, a silvery line that ran from her left temple down to her jaw. But it didn't mar her face. It defined it. It made her look like a warrior, a survivor. Sarah's hand went to her cheek instinctively, a habit she'd never been able to break. It had been 8 years since the barn fire. 8 years of people looking at the scar first, and then quickly looking away. She steeled herself. This Jacob Steele would be no different. "Miss Whitmore?" The voice was deep. Deeper than she expected. It rumbled through her like a distant thunderstorm. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. And then she saw him. And everything she thought she knew about this arrangement crumbled to dust. Mail-order husbands were supposed to be old, or mean, or desperate men no one else would have. But the man walking toward her was none of those things. He was tall, with shoulders that strained the seams of his clean white shirt. His hair was dark brown, a little too long, and his eyes, they were the color of the sky on a perfect summer day. Bluer than any eyes she had ever seen. He was handsome. Impossibly so. "Yes," she managed, her voice a small, tight thing. "I am Sarah Whitmore. You must be Mr. Steele." He took off his hat, revealing a smile that did strange things to her stomach. "Just Jacob. Welcome to Copper Ridge, Sarah. I hope the trip wasn't too hard on you." She waited. She watched his eyes, waiting for them to find the scar. Waiting for the flicker of pity, or disappointment, or disgust. But it never came. His gaze was direct, and kind, and focused entirely on her. He took her small bag from her hand before she could protest. He helped her up into his wagon, his hand warm and firm at her elbow. He even arranged a thick wool blanket over her legs, despite the heat of the Arizona sun. "Thank you," she said, her mind reeling with confusion. This kindness was a language she didn't understand. Jacob, she started, needing to get it over with, to lance the boil before it could fester. I should tell you. I'm not much to look at. My family, they may have exaggerated my qualities. I don't want you to feel you've been cheated. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only sign of the anger simmering beneath the surface. But his voice, when he spoke, was gentle. Your family doesn't know what they're talking about, Sarah, he said, his eyes meeting hers. Not even close. He clucked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, rolling out of the small town and toward the vast, open range. Sarah stole glances at him, at the strong, capable hands holding the reins, at the confident set of his shoulders. He didn't look like a man who needed to buy a wife. He looked like a man who could have any woman he wanted. So why her? Tell me about your ranch, she said, desperate to fill the silence. His whole face softened. It's not fancy. Built it myself. About 500 acres, good water, decent grazing. I run cattle, a few horses. He paused. The house needs work. It's just been me and my housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, for a few years. And why did you decide to look for a bride this way? The question tumbled out before she could stop it. Her cheeks burned with shame. I'm sorry. That was too personal. He just shook his head. It's a fair question. It's lonely out here, Sarah. A man gets tired of talking to his horse. Needs a partner. Someone to build a life with. He glanced at her, his blue eyes searching her face. What about you? What made you decide to answer my advertisement? Her stomach twisted into a knot of nausea. He thought she'd answered an advertisement. He didn't know. He didn't know her family had thrown her away like a broken doll. How could she tell him? My life in Missouri. It became difficult, she said, choosing her words with care. My sisters are both married. I thought a fresh start might be for the best. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful, as if he understood the universe of pain hidden behind her simple words. Fresh starts can save a person's life sometimes. They crested a small hill, and Sarah gasped. Spread out before them was a valley that seemed to stretch on forever, cradled by magnificent red rock cliffs. A neat, sturdy ranch house sat in the center, with a large barn and corrals beside it. Cattle dotted the landscape, and a herd of horses ran free in a far pasture, their manes flying in the wind. It was breathtaking. It's beautiful, she whispered. He wasn't looking at the ranch. He was looking at her, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin tingle. You really think so? Of course I do. Why would you ask that? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Relief. Some people, he said quietly, think it's too isolated, too far from everything. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down. He came around and held up his hands to help her down. His palms were calloused but gentle as they closed around her waist. For a second, they stood so close she could smell the scent of soap and leather and sunshine on his skin. Her heart did a frantic little dance against her ribs, and she stepped back quickly, flustered. Sarah, he said, his voice low, before we go inside, there's something you need to know. Her stomach plummeted. This was it. Now that he'd seen her up close, in the full light of day, he was changing his mind. He was going to send her back. But before he could say another word, the front door of the house opened. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face came out, wiping her hands on an apron. You must be Sarah, she said, her smile as warm as the Arizona sun. I'm Mrs. Henderson, Jacob's housekeeper. Oh, we've been so excited to meet you, dear. Sarah blinked. Excited? It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. Come along now, child. Let's get you settled. You must be worn out from that terrible journey. Mrs. Henderson bustled forward, taking Sarah's bag from Jacob's hand. Jacob, give the poor girl some room to breathe. As the housekeeper led her up the porch steps, Sarah glanced back over her shoulder. Jacob was still standing by the wagon, watching her. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of things she couldn't begin to decipher. Whatever he had been about to tell her would have to wait. But the look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. It was something important. Something that changed everything. What secret was Jacob Steele keeping from her? And why did she have the terrible feeling that the letter in her pocket was only the beginning of the story? The morning sun cast long, accusing shadows across the kitchen floor. Mrs. Henderson moved with a nervous, jerky energy, rattling pots and pans, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Sarah sat at the heavy wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah began, her voice barely a whisper. "Yesterday, when I arrived, Jacob was about to tell me something. Something he said I needed to know." The housekeeper froze, her back to Sarah. Her shoulders were rigid beneath her worn dress. "And you," Sarah continued, pressing on, "you mentioned being excited to meet me. But your eyes, they look so sad." She took a breath. "Last night I found a letter. A copy of a letter my family sent to Mr. Steele." Mrs. Henderson let out a soft, wounded sound, like a small animal in pain. She turned around slowly. Her kind face was a mask of guilt and pity. "Oh, child," she breathed, sinking into the chair opposite Sarah. I told him he had to tell you the truth the moment you arrived." She reached across the table, her calloused fingers covering Sarah's trembling ones. "That letter, your family, what did it say?" Sarah asked, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. "The real letter, what did it say?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. Her voice broke as she repeated the words, each one a fresh stab in Sarah's already wounded heart. "Damaged goods, plain, scarred, the ugly daughter." Words designed not just to describe, but to destroy. The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's numb fingers. It hit the wooden floor and shattered, the sound echoing the final, complete breaking of her spirit. She shot to her feet, the chair scraping violently behind her. Her hand flew to her scar, a shield against a world that saw only her flaws. "They never wanted me to be happy," she whispered, the awful realization crashing down on her. "This wasn't a new start. This was just another way to get rid of me." She didn't wait for a reply. She fled. Out of the kitchen, through the quiet parlor, and onto the front porch where her travel bag still sat, a grim reminder of her temporary, fragile place in this world. Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the latches. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. She had to leave. Now. Before Jacob came back from the fields. Before she had to face the pity in his eyes. "Sarah." His voice, deep and gentle. It stopped her cold. She hadn't heard his approach. Hadn't heard the soft thud of his boots on the porch steps. Slowly, painfully, she turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his blue eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name. But it wasn't pity. "Mrs. Henderson told me what happened," he said simply. He took a step closer. Sarah instinctively backed away, her hands clutching her bag like a lifeline. "Then you know," she said, her voice raw and broken. "You understand why I have to go. You know what they said, what I really am." She gestured wildly, a broken puppet. "I won't trap you in this. You deserve better than damaged goods. You deserve a real bride, a whole bride, not someone's cast-off daughter." His jaw tightened. His face was a thundercloud. In 3 long strides he closed the space between them. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her. His hands came up, not to push her away, but to cup her face, his touch impossibly gentle. "Look at me, Sarah," he commanded, his voice rough with an emotion that vibrated through his fingertips. "Look at me. And you listen." She forced her tear-filled eyes to meet his. "That letter," he said, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "That letter was the ramblings of blind, cruel people who never, ever deserved a daughter like you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "When I look at you," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "I don't see damaged goods. I see strength. I see a woman who walked through fire and came out the other side. I see a survivor." His thumb began to trace the line of her scar, from her temple down to her jaw. His touch wasn't clinical or curious. It was reverent. It sent a shockwave through her entire body. "This mark," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "This doesn't tell me you're ugly. It tells me you're brave. It tells me you're a warrior." His other hand moved to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, tilting her face up so she couldn't look away. "It doesn't make you plain, Sarah. It makes you the most extraordinary woman I have ever seen." It was too much. The kindness, the acceptance, the shocking, unbelievable words. Her defenses, so carefully constructed over 8 long years, crumbled into dust. A gut-wrenching sob tore from her throat, and she collapsed against him. His arms came around her instantly, strong and sure, holding her tight against his solid chest. He held her as if she was something precious, something to be protected. "I burned that letter the day it arrived," he murmured into her hair, his voice vibrating against her ear. "I burned it because those words had no place in this house, no place near the woman I was hoping to build a life with." "How?" she sobbed against his shirt. "How can you say that? How can you see anything good when my own family—" "Your family is wrong," he interrupted, his voice firm. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes again. "They're blind and they're cruel, and they are dead wrong. But I'm not blind, Sarah. I see you. I really see you." He leaned in and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead. "And what I see," he whispered against her skin, "takes my breath away." She stared at him, her heart a wild bird in her chest. A tiny, fragile seed of hope, a hope she thought had been crushed and buried years ago, began to stir deep inside her. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to believe you. I've been told I'm worthless for so long." A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his rugged features, making him almost painfully handsome. It lit him up from the inside out. "Then let me show you," he said simply. "Let me spend every single day proving to you that you are not what they said you were. You're not the ugly daughter, Sarah. You're my beautiful, extraordinary Sarah." He reached down and gently pried her hands from her travel bag. He took the bag and set it down inside the house, a quiet, definitive statement. "And if you'll let me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious rumble that sent shivers down her spine, "I'd like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never, ever forget it." Standing on that porch, wrapped in the arms of a man who saw past her scar to the soul beneath, Sarah felt a profound shift in the universe. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning. The days that followed were like learning a new language, the language of kindness, the language of being seen. Sarah found herself waking before the sun, not with the familiar dread that used to greet her, but with a quiet, humming excitement. She'd find Jacob in the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filling the air, and his face would light up when he saw her, as if she were the dawn itself. He suggested they plant a garden. As they knelt side by side in the rich Arizona soil, their shoulders brushing, Sarah discovered a part of herself she never knew existed. Her hands knew just how to coax tiny green shoots from the earth. When their fingers touched, reaching for the same seed packet, a jolt of electricity arced between them. Before, she would have flinched away. Now she let herself linger in the warmth of it. "You have a gift for this," Jacob said one morning, watching her. "These will be the finest vegetables in the territory." The simple pride in his voice was a balm to her old wounds. She was valued here. Her contributions mattered. As the seedlings grew, so did their conversations. Sarah told him things she'd never told another soul. How she used to teach the children in Sunday school, how their innocent questions were the only bright spot in her week. "I always dreamed of having children of my own," she confessed one evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the setting sun paint the cliffs in shades of purple and gold. "But I never thought anyone would want them with me." Jacob turned to her, his blue eyes soft in the fading light. "Those children were lucky to have you," he said quietly. "Any child would be blessed to have you as their mother." The absolute certainty in his voice made her heart race. She found herself imagining it. A little girl with her auburn hair and Jacob's blue eyes. A little boy with his father's steady hands. He, in turn, opened up to her. He spoke of the crushing weight of loneliness, of working the ranch for 3 years with only the cattle for company. "I built every inch of this place with my own hands," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "But it never felt like a home. Not until you got here. You brought it to life, Sarah. You brought me to life." Their first trip into town together was a trial by fire. Sarah felt the stares and heard the whispers. The new mail-order bride. The one with the face. She kept her chin high, her spine straight, because Jacob's hand was a warm, steady pressure at the small of her back, a silent declaration to the world. She is with me. In the general store, the conversation stopped. The air grew thick with curiosity. Jacob just smiled, a wide, easy smile, and introduced her to the storekeeper. "Mr. Albright, I'd like you to meet my Sarah. My Sarah." The words were a shield and a claim, and the townspeople, faced with his obvious pride, had no choice but to be courteous. The real test came when they met Mrs. Bellwether, the town's most notorious gossip. Her eyes, like little black beads, zoomed in on Sarah's scar with undisguised pity. "Oh my," she clucked with false sympathy. "What a terrible tragedy that must have been, dear. Such a shame." Before Sarah could shrink away, Jacob stepped forward. "Mrs. Bellwether," he said, his voice deceptively calm, but with an edge of pure steel just beneath it. "I see you're still as blind as ever. My Sarah is the most beautiful woman in this territory. Any man with eyes in his head can see that. Perhaps you should pay Doc Morrison a visit about some spectacles." The woman gasped, sputtered, and bustled away in a cloud of indignation. Sarah stared at Jacob, her mouth hanging open in stunned amazement. No one had ever defended her before. Ever. That night, the stars seemed brighter, closer. They sat on the porch, the vast, silent desert stretching out around them. He talked of his dreams for the ranch. She talked of her secret hope to teach again. "We could build a schoolhouse," he said, his face lighting up. "Right here on the ranch, for all the local children. You could teach them. Would that make you happy, Sarah?" The way he said her name, like it was the most beautiful word he knew, made her heart feel like it would burst. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and serious. "What's happening between us? This isn't about an arrangement anymore. This isn't obligation." He struggled for the words. This is the kind of love I didn't think was real." Tears pricked her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure joy. "I feel it too," she whispered. I never thought I deserved to be loved like this." He lifted their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. She opened her mouth to tell him, to finally say the words that were blooming in her heart. "I love you. A letter for you, Sarah." Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway, her face troubled. She was holding a crisp white envelope that seemed to glow in the lamplight. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that handwriting. It was from her sister Margaret. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Jacob moved closer on the swing, his solid presence a silent support as she unfolded the paper. The letter was short, and it was a masterpiece of cruelty. "Dearest Sarah," it began, the sweetness of it like poison on the tongue. "We hope you are well, though we cannot imagine you are thriving in such primitive conditions. We write to inform you that your presence is required at home immediately. Father has taken gravely ill, and Mother needs your assistance." Sarah's voice cracked as she read the words aloud, Jacob's arm coming around her shoulders. The lie was so familiar. Her father had been gravely ill a dozen times whenever her family needed something from her. But it was the last paragraph that revealed the true, twisted reason for the summons. Perhaps it is for the best you return. Margaret's engagement to Harrison Whitmore has been regrettably broken. It seems Mr. Whitmore developed a disturbing preference for character over conventional beauty. We fear your situation has given people the wrong impression. Your return would help restore the natural order of things and remind everyone of what is truly important in a woman. The letter slipped from her numb fingers. Jacob caught it. His eyes scanned the page again, his face growing dark, his jaw turning to granite. "They don't want you back to help," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "They want you back to make your sister look better. They want to parade you around like a circus freak to prove how pretty Margaret is by comparison." The old shame, the old feelings of worthlessness came rushing back, a toxic tide threatening to drown her. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, her hand flying to her cheek. "Maybe I am being selfish. What if Father really is sick this time?" Jacob's hands cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were blazing. "Sarah, listen to me. Your father has been dying for years, and even if he was, you don't owe them your happiness. They gave up any right to your loyalty when they sold you like a sack of damaged flour." His thumb traced her scar, a gesture that was now as familiar as breathing. "You are not going back there. I will not let them hurt you again. I won't let them destroy what we're building." Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the night. The thunder of hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. 3 riders galloped into the ranch yard, their horses lathered in sweat. Jacob was on his feet in an instant, his hand moving instinctively to the gun on his hip. "Pete! What's wrong?" he yelled to the lead rider. "Rustlers, Jacob!" the man gasped, pulling his horse to a skidding halt. "They hit the Morrison place last night. Took near 100 head. Word is they're moving this way, hitting every ranch between here and the border." The other men nodded grimly, their eyes scanning the dark horizon. Jacob's mind was racing. "How many?" "At least a dozen," Pete said, "heavily armed." A dozen. Jacob had himself and 2 ranch hands, hundreds of cattle spread across thousands of acres. The odds were impossible. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. Sarah watched them, her heart pounding. The men talked of fighting, of defenses, of where to make a stand. It all sounded hopeless. They would be overwhelmed. Jacob could be killed. And then, an idea sparked in her mind. A memory of something Mrs. Henderson had mentioned offhand just days before. A piece of local history. "Jacob," she said quietly, tugging on his sleeve. The men stopped talking and turned to look at her. Their faces were a mixture of surprise and polite dismissal. The woman was talking. How quaint. But Jacob's eyes were different. They were focused, interested. "What is it, Sarah? What are you thinking?" The respect in his voice gave her courage. She stood a little taller. "The old mining caves," she said, her voice growing stronger as the plan took shape in her mind. "Up in Devil's Canyon. Mrs. Henderson said they're huge, big enough to hide the entire herd, and there's only one way in and out. If we could get the cattle there, drive them up the canyon before the rustlers arrive. They'd ride right past. They'd never find them." Pete, the cowboy, actually snorted. "Lady, with all due respect, those caves ain't been used in 20 years. They could be flooded, caved in, full of rattlesnakes, and driving a whole herd up that narrow canyon, we'd be trapped. It would be suicide." But Jacob was already nodding, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. He looked at her with an expression of pure awe. "It's brilliant," he breathed. "Absolutely brilliant. Sarah's right. We can't outfight them. But we can outthink them." He turned to the other men, his voice snapping with authority. "Pete, you and your men ride for those caves now. Check them. If they're clear, we move the herd, tonight." The next 12 hours were a blur of frantic, desperate work. While Jacob and the men rounded up the scattered cattle in the dark, Sarah took charge at the ranch. She packed supplies, counted out ammunition, and sent Mrs. Henderson on the fastest horse to ride for the sheriff in town, a full day's ride away. When one of the young ranch hands was gored by a spooked bull, his arm sliced open, Sarah didn't panic. Using skills she'd learned helping the town doctor back home, She cleaned the wound, stitched it closed with a steady hand, and had him back on his feet. As the first gray light of dawn broke over the mountains, the last of Jacob's herd disappeared into the dark mouth of the hidden cave. The canyon fell silent. The plan had worked. For now. Jacob found her standing at the entrance to the canyon, a rifle held firmly in her hands, her eyes scanning the valley below. She looked exhausted, her dress was torn and covered in dust, but her face was set with a fierce, unwavering determination. He stopped a few feet away, just looking at her. "I have never," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "been more proud of anyone in my entire life." The rustlers arrived 2 hours later. From their hiding spot high in the rocks, Sarah and Jacob watched them. A dozen hard-faced men riding through the empty pastures, their frustration and anger visible even from a distance. They circled the silent ranch house, kicked at the cold ashes in the fire pit, and finally, with a string of curses that echoed up the canyon, they rode away empty-handed. They were safe. The ranch was safe. She had done it. That evening, the stars returned to a peaceful sky. They sat on the porch swing, side by side, the comfortable silence of shared victory between them. Jacob took both of her hands in his. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and serious, "these past weeks, you've shown me what a real partner is. You're not just beautiful, you're brilliant. You're not just kind, you're the bravest person I've ever met. You saved this ranch today. You saved me." He slid off the swing and knelt before her on one knee. The porch boards creaked under his weight. He pulled a small, simple gold band from his pocket. It gleamed in the moonlight. "Sarah Whitmore," he said, his blue eyes searching hers. "Will you marry me? Not because of some letter, not because of an arrangement, but because I love you. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be a man who deserves you." Through a fresh wave of tears, Sarah saw the letter from her family, still lying on the porch where it had fallen. It was a choice, laid bare, a past that saw her as a burden, or a future with a man who saw her as his salvation. The decision was the easiest one she had ever made. "Yes, Jacob Steele," she said, her voice clear and strong and filled with a joy she had never known. "Yes, I'll marry you." She reached down and touched his cheek. "And no, I'm never going back. This is my home now. You are my family." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. As he stood and pulled her into his arms, she felt the last of the old chains breaking, falling away into the dust, replaced by the warm, solid gold promise of a life she had never dared to dream of. But as he kissed her, a new dust cloud appeared on the distant horizon. A stagecoach, moving far too fast, and it was heading straight for them. The morning sun had barely cleared the tops of the mountains when the stagecoach rattled into the ranch yard, a whirlwind of dust and indignation. It disgorged Sarah's family like a foul sickness upon the land. Her mother stepped out first, her face a pinched mask of disapproval, her eyes sweeping over the modest ranch house with open contempt. "Sarah Elizabeth," she declared, her voice the same sharp, cutting instrument that had shaped Sarah's entire life. "This foolishness ends now. Gather your things, we are going home." Her father, looking remarkably robust for a man supposedly at death's door, puffed out his chest. "Young man," he said, addressing Jacob as if he were a stable boy, "I don't know what lies my daughter has been telling you, but this arrangement is over. She's coming home, where she belongs." Behind them, Margaret stood with her nose in the air, a smug, cruel smile playing on her lips. But what they didn't know was that Sarah had woken up that morning with Jacob's ring on her finger. What they didn't know was that Jacob had seen the coach coming from miles away. And what they really didn't know was that Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had become more of a mother in a few weeks than Sarah's own had been in a lifetime, was a force of nature. "If they think they can walk into my house and bully my girl," she had muttered fiercely an hour earlier, while pressing Sarah's only good dress, "they have another think coming. This wedding is happening today. Mark my words." Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and her family. His stance was relaxed, but his eyes were pure ice. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice deadly calm, "I believe you're trespassing. Sarah is my fiancée, and she has already made her choice." "Fiancée?" Margaret let out a short, ugly laugh. "Oh, please. Jacob, isn't it? Have you looked at her? I mean, really looked at her face? That scar. It's hideous. You can't possibly want to marry that. This is just some pathetic act of pity." She glided closer, trying to look seductive. "I'm the real beauty in the family. Surely you can see that." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Jacob started to laugh. A deep, rich, genuine laugh that echoed across the yard. Margaret's face turned a shade of crimson. "Ma'am," Jacob said, finally catching his breath, "I've seen mud puddles with more depth and beauty than you possess. Your sister, this woman right here, is worth 10 of you. And if you can't see that, then you're just as ugly on the inside as you seem to be on the outside." Something inside Sarah snapped. Not in a bad way, in a powerful way. A lifetime of cowering, of accepting their judgment, of believing their poison. It all burned away in that one moment. She saw them for what they were. Small, hollow people, who could only feel tall by pushing someone else down. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. Her mother started to sputter. "Sarah, you will not—" "I said no," Sarah repeated, stepping out from behind Jacob. She faced them, her chin high, her shoulders back. The woman who had arrived here was gone. "I'm not going home with you. I'm marrying Jacob. Today. And I am staying here where I am loved. Where I am valued." Her father's face turned purple. "You ungrateful girl. After everything we've done for you, you choose this. This dirt patch over your own blood?" "The only thing you've ever done for me," Sarah said, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she had, "was teach me what love isn't. You taught me that family can be a cage. But Jacob taught me what it means to be free." She reached for Jacob's hand, and their fingers intertwined. "He sees me, the real me, and he thinks I'm beautiful. Your opinion no longer matters." Just then, another wagon pulled into the yard, and another. It was the Reverend Thompson, followed by half the town of Copper Ridge, all alerted by Mrs. Henderson's urgent message that a wedding was about to happen. The Reverend beamed, ignoring the toxic family drama. "I understand we have a wedding to perform." Margaret made one last desperate stand. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "Sarah, you can't be this stupid. He'll leave you the moment someone better, someone prettier, comes along." Sarah turned to her sister. For the first time, she didn't feel hurt. She felt pity. "Margaret, you've spent your whole life believing your face is your only asset. That must be terrifying, because beauty fades. But character, strength, kindness, those last forever. I have something you'll never understand. A man who loves me for my mind and my heart, and yes, even for my scars. Because they are the story of how I became the woman he fell in love with." The wedding was on the front porch. Sarah, in her simple blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, had never looked more beautiful. Jacob's voice was strong and clear as he made his vows. And when he kissed his bride, the cheers of the town drowned out the sputtering rage of her family. Later that evening, after her family had retreated in bitter, humiliated defeat, Jacob carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly their home. Their wedding night was not about obligation. It was a celebration, a tender, passionate discovery. Jacob worshipped her body, his hands and lips erasing years of shame. When he kissed her scar, he whispered, "My beautiful, brave wife." And she finally believed it. Lying in his arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" she asked quietly. Jacob's hand stroked her hair. "Maybe. But it doesn't matter, Sarah. What matters is that you understand your own worth now. What matters is us." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I think your sister got a pretty clear lesson today about what real beauty looks like." Sarah smiled against his chest. Tomorrow they would begin building their life. But tonight, she was simply home. Free. And loved. 6 months later, Sarah stood on that same porch, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. Jacob was in the corral, working with a young horse, and when he looked up and saw her, his face broke into that same breathtaking smile. Her heart still did a little flip. When she'd told him about the baby, he had wept with joy. He'd spent the entire evening with his hand on her stomach, talking to their unborn child, telling them stories about the ranch and about their incredible mama. The ranch flourished. But more importantly, the little schoolhouse Jacob built for her flourished. 3 days a week, the laughter of a dozen children filled the air. She had found her purpose. Their daughter, Grace, was born in the fall, with Jacob's blue eyes and Sarah's quiet strength. 2 years later, twins, James and Emma, arrived, bringing chaos and boundless joy. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with love. When little Grace was old enough, she asked about the scar on her mother's face. Sarah knelt down and looked her daughter in the eye. "This mark, my love, is a story. It's the story of how Mama survived something scary, so she could be strong enough to find your papa and have you." Grace solemnly traced the scar with her tiny finger, then leaned in and kissed it. "It makes you special, Mama," she declared with the simple, profound wisdom of a child. Years melted away. Sarah became the heart of Copper Ridge, known for her kindness and wisdom. The scarred, unwanted girl was now the woman everyone turned to for help and counsel. One day, a familiar stagecoach arrived. A lone passenger got out. It was Margaret. But the proud, cruel woman was gone. In her place was a tired, defeated person, her beauty faded, her eyes empty. Her husband had left her with a mountain of debt, and their parents had disowned her for the scandal. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, the admission costing her everything. Sarah looked at her sister, the ghost of 1,000 childhood wounds whispering in her ear. Jacob stood behind her, their children clinging to his legs, watching. "You may stay for 2 weeks," Sarah said, her voice calm and firm. "But in this house, you will be kind. You will be respectful. Those are the rules." Margaret watched her sister's life, a life filled with love, respect, and purpose. On her last night, she found Sarah on the porch. "I was wrong," Margaret said quietly. "I spent my whole life thinking beauty was all that mattered. But watching you, seeing the way he loves you, the way this whole town looks up to you, I finally understand. You're the beautiful one, Sarah." "Beauty fades, Margaret," Sarah said gently. "But a kind heart is a legacy. It's not too late to build a life that matters." Decades passed. Their children grew and had children of their own. One evening, as an older, grayer Sarah was cleaning out a storage box, she found it. The charred, brittle remains of that first, cruel letter, which Jacob had never fully thrown away. She called to her husband, and together they walked out to the fire pit. They watched as the last hateful fragments of her past turned to ash and disappeared forever into the twilight sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Coming all this way? To a stranger?" Sarah looked up into the face she had loved for a lifetime. The lines were deeper, but the blue of his eyes was the same. "Never," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I was never the ugly daughter, Jacob. I was just a flower planted in the wrong soil. You gave me sunshine. You let me bloom." That night, she sat at her desk and wrote a letter to each of her grandchildren, to be opened when they were old enough to understand. She told them that true worth comes from the strength of your character and the kindness in your heart. She told them to never, ever let anyone else define who they are. She signed each one the same way. "With all my love, your grandmother, Sarah," who learned that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the ugliest beginnings. If you enjoyed this story of hope and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that will move your heart.